Ethan Cross sat in the cramped cockpit of his old two-engine research plane, listening to the dull whir of the propellers slice through humid Pacific air. The sun was nearly gone, little more than a scarlet glow on the horizon. A gentle wind rattled the fuselage, while scattered wisps of cloud drifted in the upper atmosphere. Ethan, by trade and by heart, was an archaeologist, one with a fondness for mysteries left untold by ancient civilizations. He had tracked legends, half corroborated by local fishermen, about an uncharted place far off the established flight paths. Rumors told of curious geometric plants, unnatural alignments of stones, and the tantalizing suggestion of an island that did not appear on any standard chart. His determination to solve these riddles had carried him over restless seas, past sun-blasted atolls seldom visited by man. That day, the flight instruments twitched with inexplicable readings. A swirl of electromagnetic interference danced across the gauges. Moments later, thick clouds rolled in from nowhere, forming a circular barrier of dense storm clouds. In the hope of bypassing the anomaly, Ethan tried to climb, then banked left to see if the strange weather would relent. Yet his plane shook, battered by an unseen force. The altimeter began spinning wildly. The radio crackled a frantic array of static. Without warning, the engine coughed, sputtered, then lost power altogether. Alarms screamed in discord. Ethan barely had time to send a fractured Mayday signal. Mayday, plane going down, unidentified interference, losing altitude. Lightning snaked across the sky, illuminating the empty ocean below. Then, through a gap in the clouds, he spotted land, its coast faintly outlined in moonlit gloom. He pulled back on the yoke with all his strength. The belly of the plane skimmed the treetops before plunging into a clearing with a sickening crash. It happened in heart-pounding seconds, but for Ethan, it felt like an eternity, metal scraping, glass shattering, the screech of dying engines. The plane skidded across uneven ground and came to rest against a stand of large, otherworldly ferns. In the sudden quiet, only the tink of cooling metal broke the hush. For a moment, Ethan sat still, chest heaving. He tested his arms, then his legs. The relief of finding himself alive pulsed through him. Shaking fingers undid his harness. He pressed the battered cockpit door open. Outside, a moonlit canopy rose high, branches twisted in symmetrical shapes, so exquisite that they might have been fashioned by the hand of a topiary sculptor. A vague sense of awe settled over him, quickly overpowered by the urgent need to survive. His plane was done for. Its wings snapped off like broken bird bones. Taking a battered flashlight from his emergency kit, he cast a beam over the wreckage. Smoke hissed from the engine cowling. Fuel dripped in steady rivulets from a ruptured line, but there was no immediate blaze. At the edge of his vision, one shape took form. Lush greenery that coiled in near-perfect spirals, too perfect for random evolution. Ethan's mind recalled a swirl of ancient artifacts found in far corners of the globe, etched with spiral motifs. He had never seen living plants mimic such geometry so exactly. He rummaged for supplies: canteen, first aid pouch, a small survival knife, and a short-range flare gun. His satellite phone lay uselessly cracked on the cockpit floor, and the rest of the plane's electronics were unresponsive. The notion of a strange interference returned to him, a crackle that had devoured his communications mid-flight. He stepped carefully out into the clearing, the wide leaves overhead forming an almost cathedral-like vault. An uncanny hush reigned, broken only by faint insect chirrs. The air smelled of salt, as though the ocean was not far off, and of damp soil. Ethan pressed forward. He needed stable ground, perhaps an elevated vantage from which he might see the coastline and signal for help. Each step took him deeper into the heart of a jungle that defied reason. Some ferns glowed faintly with a bioluminescent sheen, casting spidery reflections on the ground. Vines spiraled upward in precisely measured angles, reminiscent of the golden ratio. If the rumors he had pursued were correct, this was Talinor, the fabled island that none had successfully charted. It felt at once exotic and forbidden, and yet, the deeper Ethan walked, the more a subtle fear took root in his chest. The shapes around him flickered in the dancing glow of moonlight and the faint luminescence of the vegetation. One vine, the thickness of his wrist, curled in a pattern too symmetrical to be natural, each coil matching the last with mathematical perfection. He paused to shine his flashlight upon it. The pattern repeated along the vine for at least 12 feet, descending in smaller increments akin to fractals. He heard a rustle behind him, turned abruptly, heart hammering. Nothing revealed itself. Only a gentle breeze swayed the leaves. He reminded himself that night in any jungle is full of surprises. No need to panic yet. Still, a tension slithered beneath his skin. He resumed walking, pressing aside thick fronds until he emerged onto a slight ridge. Below, through a sparse break in the canopy, the ocean extended under the moon's waning silver light. The coastline curved gracefully. In the near distance, he could make out the plane's wreck, a dark shape surrounded by broken branches. Drawing a steadying breath, Ethan raised his flare gun, fired a single bright magnesium flash, and watched the glowing embers fade over the restless waters. Silence. The oppressive realization that no one might be close enough to see the signal settled upon him. He found a vantage point beneath a broad tree and sat to collect his thoughts. This island appeared deserted. No flickers of human habitation from fires or artificial lights. Yet, the geometry in the vegetation suggested something beyond chance. The hush gave him the sense that the place was waiting or watching. At dawn, Ethan awoke to the metallic taste of fear and the sticky warmth of the island's humidity. The rising sun bathed the foliage in gold, revealing details that had been obscured by darkness. Leaves shaped into hexagonal clusters, branches bending in arcs so uniform that they might have been measured with a compass. He slung his pack onto his shoulder, deciding that he must search for fresh water. The day's initial trek led him to a stream cutting across the terrain in a strangely straight line. The water was extraordinarily clear, cold to the touch. He refilled his canteen, alert for predators. Satisfying himself that no immediate threat lurked nearby, he sipped the liquid, finding it sweet and refreshing. Then, the hush broke. A resonant hum, faint at first, then gradually intensifying, began to reverberate through the jungle. The plants themselves seemed to respond, the broad leaves quivering in unison. The hum thrummed in Ethan's chest, almost as if a massive generator were winding up. In a clearing up ahead, he spotted a circular pattern in the grass, marked by swirling shapes that glowed with a soft turquoise shimmer. Fascinated, he advanced. The hum intensified, becoming a tangible pressure behind his eyes. Suddenly, the air rippled with an electric charge, and in that moment, Ethan's watch died. The small compass in his hand spun in disoriented circles. He felt the hairs on his arm stand on end. The hum reached a crescendo, then subsided, leaving behind a thick silence once more. It was as if the island was alive, a massive organism cycling through its morning ritual. Sweating slightly, Ethan pressed onward. Though the island gave hints of intelligence, Ethan had no concrete evidence of sentient life until midday. He was cutting a path through dense foliage, using his short blade to slice away tangled vines, when he sensed another presence. He froze, listening, heart pounding. Nothing but the cry of distant birds. Then, from behind him, a voice. "Why have you come?" He spun around, brandishing the blade. At first, he saw no one. Then the shadows shifted, revealing a tall figure hidden among the broad, curling fronds. The shape drew closer, stepping into a shaft of sunlight that illuminated her visage. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. A woman, though unlike any he had ever seen. She was taller than he, with willowy limbs and elongated features that carried an otherworldly grace. Her eyes were a luminous shade of blue with flecks of silver, her ears tapering gently to a slight point. She wore a sleek suit of unknown material, and in her hand, she held what appeared to be a staff or spear. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a soft croak emerged. She raised her chin, studying him with undisguised curiosity, and repeated, "Why have you come?" "Plain," Ethan began, half stammering. "I crashed here. My instruments failed. I didn't mean to." She regarded him intently. Her expression softened, though a faint air of caution lingered in her poise. "No one has come to Talinor in many years," she said, voice scarcely louder than a whisper. "It is hidden, protected by a field that disrupts your primitive machines." He swallowed, lowering his blade. "Talinor. So it does have a name." Her lips curved slightly, a gesture that might have been amusement or puzzlement. You speak it well for one whose species does not know it. He cautiously returned the blade to its sheath. I'm Ethan Cross, he offered, voice still shaky. I'm an archaeologist. She tilted her head. My name is Rhea, she said at length. And if you value your life, you must leave this place. He huffed out a breath. My plane is shattered. I can't leave unless I radio for help, and that doesn't work with your whatever it is. Rhea studied him. The barrier, she said. It prevents detection, halts electromagnetic signals. Once activated, it allows no transmissions. Ethan felt a pang of dread. So I'm stuck. Her eyes flickered, capturing the sunlight with an almost prismatic glow. Indeed, she said, her voice softer. Trapped, as I am. Those words evoked a deep curiosity in Ethan. How had she come here, and why was she trapped? But she gestured for him to follow, turning away without a word of explanation. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan fell and stepped behind her. Rhea led him to a cluster of oddly geometric rock formations. From a distance, it seemed like a natural outcropping, yet up close, Ethan could see faint seams and structural patterns that hinted at a sophisticated design. A low entrance opened into a wide chamber illuminated by the same turquoise glow he'd observed in the clearing. Ethan's breath caught when he saw the walls. Their surfaces were etched with spiraling lines, shapes repeating in fractal geometry. Some sections pulsed with a faint internal light, while others flickered as though shorting out. Rhea touched a panel, and a gentle hum filled the chamber. This was once a hub for my people, she said quietly. A place of research, of study, meant to remain hidden from yours. Her words sent a thrill through Ethan. He pressed a hand to the wall, feeling a subtle warmth. Your people, are you human? She turned, regarding him with those alien blue eyes. Partially, she said, her tone layered with an emotion Ethan couldn't parse. I was a hybrid creation, a test subject designed to interact with Earth's environment without the constraints my original race faced. They taught me to speak your languages, to move among you, and to understand your world. But once the experiment failed and the barrier was erected, I was left behind. His heart clenched at that. They abandoned you. She studied him for a moment, expression unreadable. They believed I was lost in a containment breach. Or perhaps it was simpler to leave me here, to conceal the evidence of my existence. Ethan ran a hand across the etched patterns in the wall. I've never seen technology like this, he whispered, eyes alive with awe. Rhea gave a small nod. It is old, even by my people's standards. The barrier disrupts signals not only across electromagnetic spectra, but through other energies as well. I've tried to repair it, tried to power it down, but the design requires a fusion of mental and mechanical input. A single mind cannot recalibrate it. She spoke these words carefully, as if testing Ethan's reaction. He wondered if she trusted him yet, or if she merely found him an unwitting piece in some larger puzzle. But, he ventured, maybe with two of us. Rhea's eyes widened, a flicker of hope crossing her face, swiftly replaced by guarded caution. The barrier has begun failing in recent weeks, she admitted. The island's geometry is fracturing. You've no doubt witnessed the unnatural symmetry in the vegetation, the pulses of energy at dawn. These are signs that the original systems holding Talinor together are breaking down. Ethan frowned. What happens when it fails entirely? A troubled sigh escaped her. If we do nothing, the entire framework collapses and causes a catastrophic reaction. The island will break apart, possibly unleashing destructive energy across a vast swath of the ocean. It's dangerous, yet I can't fix it alone. He realized she was inviting his help. He could scarcely believe it. An alien woman, half human, half something else, marooned like him and in need of a second mind to operate advanced systems. His earlier fear mingled with a strange elation. He cleared his throat. I'm not an engineer, but I know pattern recognition, and I can handle instructions. If your system needs a second operator, maybe I can help. Her eyes glowed brighter, that hopeful spark flaring anew. The system was designed to be controlled by multiple individuals. The interface we use depends on neural impulses. My half-human mind may prove compatible with yours. I can guide you. He nodded, heartbeat thumping. Then let's do it. Show me what to do. They spent the rest of the afternoon deep in the luminous corridors, moving from panel to panel as Rhea explained the minimal knowledge she possessed about the technology. Ethan studied every fractal pattern, attempting to find repeating motifs that might serve as keys. The walls pulsed in response to their presence, as though the island recognized that living beings were inside it. In a lower chamber, they discovered a half-buried console with multiple input panels. Above it hovered a rotating holographic display, long dormant, Rhea said, but now flickering to life, perhaps due to Ethan's arrival. This display, Rhea said, brushing away dust that had gathered in a corner, controls the barrier's integrity. It's subdivided into fields, each meant to be calibrated. Yet it is incomplete. She placed a slender hand against one panel. It glowed under her palm, revealing lines of alien script. I cannot read all of it, she admitted softly, for my knowledge was incomplete when they abandoned me. But I can glean enough to know we must shut down certain defense routines, or they will block our approach to the main core. Ethan grimaced. Defense routines, like automated turrets? A faint smile crossed her lips. Among other things, creatures that were once docile have grown aggressive under the malfunctioning systems. The island's environment was engineered to be somewhat interactive, capable of responding to outsiders. He recalled the humming in the morning, the symmetrical vines. You mean the plant life was artificially altered? Yes, she said with a note of regret. My people sought to study Earth's biological evolution. We manipulated certain flora and fauna, speeding their adaptation, layering them with engineered traits. Ethan let out a soft whistle. Well, you succeeded. It's like nothing I've ever seen. They labored over the console, attempting to deactivate the interior defenses. Under Rhea's guidance, Ethan pressed a series of glowing symbols, aligning the fractal patterns. At one point, the console emitted a sudden shriek of static, and Rhea recoiled as though in pain. Are you all right? Ethan asked, rushing to her side. Her face was pale, fine lines of tension at the corners of her otherworldly eyes. The system is rejecting a partial override. It recognizes me only as half-authorized. It senses your input, but the mismatch in our neural impulses triggers a default rejection. He wiped sweat from his brow. So we need another method. She nodded. We must reach the core directly. It's on the far side of the island, deep in a place called the heart of Talinor. That chamber holds the final interface, which can either restore stability or shut the barrier down safely. But if we do not do it properly, the system may catastrophically fail. He swallowed, a wave of apprehension coursing through him. Then we go, he said, tomorrow at first light. They spent a tense night in the half-ruined corridors, Ethan propping himself against a smooth wall while Rhea watched over him, half lost in her own thoughts. Time weighed heavily. Ethan's mind spun with countless questions. Who were her people, truly? Where did they reside? And why had they chosen Earth for experimentation? Yet Rhea seemed pensive, distant. When he asked if she ever regretted her existence as a hybrid, she merely shrugged and said quietly, I've known no other way to be. When dawn arrived, the island once again hummed. A wave of shimmering light passed through the corridors, causing fractal lines to flare and fade. Rhea guided Ethan through labyrinthine tunnels, eventually emerging onto a plateau that overlooked the lush interior. The scenery was breathtaking under the early morning rays. Uniform rows of trees that spiraled in symmetrical arcs, vines weaving lattices overhead, and in the distance, the faint glimmer of the ocean. A breeze rustled through the jungle, stirring leaves in mathematically perfect clusters. As they ventured deeper, the environment grew hostile. Certain plants twitched, their tendrils lashing out with surprising speed. In places, shimmering spore clouds drifted across the path, forcing them to cover their faces and hurry past. At midday, they found a wide clearing, the ground pockmarked with hexagonal tiles that seemed to have sprouted from below. Even the grass in these tiles grew in precise rings. This region is heavily guarded, Rhea said, her voice hushed. I sensed the presence of the adaptive systems. They were designed to repel intruders. Almost on cue, a flash of movement streaked across the clearing. Something crouched at the far side. An animal with the body of a cat but the scaled limbs of a reptile, eyes glowing faintly green. It hissed, baring teeth shaped in ways no earthly creature possessed. Ethan's pulse quickened. He slowly unslung his small flare gun, hardly a real weapon, but Rhea motioned for him to still. From her belt, she produced a slender device, something akin to a baton. With a twist, the device extended, crackling with blue sparks at the tip. "Let's hope the override we attempted last night dulled their aggression," she murmured, stepping calmly into the clearing. The scaled cat thing snarled, advancing a step. Its eyes were locked on Rhea. Another hiss sounded behind Ethan, and he whirled to see a second creature, identical to the first, creeping from the foliage. Rhea lifted the baton. A shimmering sphere expanded from its tip, enveloping them both in a faint, spherical field. The creatures lunged, claws scraping harmlessly against the barrier's surface. Ethan stumbled backward in alarm. Rhea's face twisted in concentration, as though maintaining the barrier demanded effort. "We'll walk slowly," she whispered, straight across the clearing. "If we run, they'll chase." They inched forward. The creatures circled, snarling at the shimmering barrier. Now and then, one would throw itself at them, only to be flung back by the energy field. Sweat trickled down Ethan's spine. The clearing felt like an arena, with predators on all sides. He kept imagining the barrier might fail at any instant. Finally, they reached a cluster of boulders that formed a rough exit. Rhea dropped the barrier, panting lightly, while the cat lizards hissed a final time and retreated into the gloom. Beyond this clearing lay the heart of Talinor. Ethan sensed it before he saw it, a radiant energy shimmering through the canopy, sending pulses of turquoise light skyward at intervals. The terrain descended into a broad valley, the center of which housed an enormous crystalline structure. "Behold," Rhea said, voice reverent, "the heart of this island. The mineral core that powers the barrier is housed within that spire." Ethan stared in wonder. The spire glistened like quartz lit from within. Multiple facets reflected sunlight in dazzling bursts. Strands of twisted vines latticed up its sides, pulsating faintly in time with the spire's glow. But from their vantage, it was clear something was wrong. Cracks ran through many of the crystal's facets, leaking bluish sparks. A hiss of energy boiled out from the most severely damaged areas, rising in an eerie haze that shimmered overhead. Rhea's expression darkened. "The system is failing more quickly than I feared. If we do not act soon, the entire infrastructure will collapse. The destructive force could tear this island apart in a violent chain reaction." Ethan's mouth felt dry. "How do we stop it?" She drew a shaky breath. "There's a primary control panel at the base of that spire. We must interface with it simultaneously. My alien half can decode certain locks. Your human neural patterns can bypass the rest." A quake rippled beneath their feet. The ground cracked, and a jagged line tore through the surrounding vegetation. Ethan and Rhea had to scramble to maintain balance as the earth trembled. A chunk of hillside collapsed a few hundred yards away, sending a rumble echoing across the valley. Ethan looked at her with wide eyes. "We're running out of time." She nodded, and together they hurried along a precarious path that wound down the valley. More quakes followed, each one stronger, the crystal spire responding with strobing pulses of light. They reached the base of the spire, stepping onto a smooth platform that, like everything else, displayed fractal designs. Flickering columns rose, forming an alcove of sorts where a series of panels glowed. Without hesitation, Rhea pressed her palm to one of the controls, motioning for Ethan to do the same with an adjacent pad. The moment his skin touched the panel, he felt a jolt rush up his arm, an electric tingle that set his hairs on end. "Focus," she whispered, closing her eyes. "Imagine that you're trying to speak through this device." He tried, letting his mind wander, picturing patterns of thought bridging the gap between him and the crystal spire. A deep hum filled the platform, the fractal lines beneath their feet brightening. Rhea inhaled sharply, eyes fluttering as though she perceived something beyond physical sight. Complex shapes shimmered across the panel, alien symbols dancing like luminous script. Ethan understood none of it, yet he glimpsed images in his mind, branching lines of code, swirling fractals that responded to emotional impulses. He did his best to remain steady, sending calm thoughts, hoping to assist Rhea's efforts. "This is it," she said through clenched teeth. "We are close to shutting down the destructive sequence. I must override the meltdown." The ground convulsed. A new crack erupted in the spire, sending a bolt of energy lashing out. Sparks rained around them. Rhea trembled, sweat beading at her temples. "Hold your focus," she cried. Ethan pressed his palm harder, resisting the urge to jump back from the sizzling arcs of electricity. The humming rose in pitch, teetering on the edge of agony. Then abruptly, the spire's glow vanished, replaced by darkness. For several seconds, Ethan thought the entire system had died. Then the spire pulsed once, soft, gentle, and the fractal lines began to stabilize, shining with a calm, steady radiance. Rhea let out a shaky breath, sliding down to her knees. "It's done," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The meltdown is halted. The barrier is deactivated." Ethan kneeled beside her, chest heaving. He could scarcely believe it was over. But as he glanced up, he realized the spire's radiance was dimmer, as though deprived of its main power. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Rhea's gaze fell to the crystal surface. "The island's unnatural features will begin to degrade. The systems that manipulated the vegetation will cease, returning these plants to their default biology in time. Perhaps that is for the best." She stood unsteadily, leaning on Ethan's arm for support. "The barrier that hid Talinor from the world is no longer active. Others may eventually find this place. The advanced technology here will fade, crumble without the sustaining field. And I—" Her voice broke off, and Ethan realized she was shaking. "I was connected to that system for so long," she murmured. "It sustained me, just as it sustained the island. Now, I can feel it slipping away. The hybrid energy that kept me tied to this place is unraveling." A stab of concern lanced Ethan's heart. "Are you in danger?" She tried to smile. "I will live, but I don't know if I can remain on Talinor. It may no longer sustain my hybrid form. If I stay, I could fail." Ethan's gut twisted. He had only just met this remarkable being, and the notion of losing her so soon struck him like a blow. "Then come with me," he blurted, not fully weighing the words. "There's no reason to remain if the island can't support you. You said the barrier is down. Maybe someone can finally spot us." Her eyes widened, shining with the reflection of the softened crystal glow. "I have never set foot in your world," she said hesitantly. "All my knowledge of humanity was taught in laboratories, in observation rooms. The real Earth outside Talinor is unknown to me." He lowered his gaze, sympathy welling up. "We can figure it out. We'll signal a plane, or a ship. Once they arrive, we can leave." She peered into the distance, where the ocean sparkled under midday sun. "Yes," she said softly. "It seems that is my only choice." They climbed from the valley. Without the barrier's hum, the island was changing before their eyes. Some of the plants continued to glow, but faintly. Others lost their unnaturally perfect curves, reverting to more random shapes. A few of the monstrous hybrid creatures skittered into undergrowth, uncertain as the environment they once dominated bent to new rules. While crossing a cracked outcropping, Ethan heard a roar overhead. At first, he feared it was thunder, but the sky was clear. Then, from behind a coastal ridge, emerged a helicopter. It bore no national insignia that he recognized, but it was undeniably a rescue vessel. The barrier's absence had allowed them to detect the island. Ethan waved frantically from a high vantage. After a moment, the helicopter changed course, heading their way. Dust and broken leaves whipped around them as it circled overhead. A uniformed crewman lowered a ladder. Rhea's eyes were wide. She gripped Ethan's hand. "I feel so exposed," she confessed, voice trembling. "What if they fear me?" He squeezed her hand gently. "We'll handle it. I won't let them harm you." She gave him a grateful nod, then braced herself to climb. Step by step, they ascended, buffeted by the rotor wash, until they reached the open door. The crewman pulled them aboard with a mix of confusion and relief. Within minutes, they were airborne. Rhea stared at the receding island, her face a mask of profound emotion. By the time they reached a naval vessel that had anchored miles off Talinor's shore, night was falling once more. Ethan explained how he had crash-landed, while carefully omitting details that might stoke panic. Still, the presence of Rhea, clearly not an ordinary human, sparked whispered conversations among the ship's crew. A makeshift medical station was set up to examine them. The doctor, sporting a look of utter bewilderment, could only conclude that Rhea was physically stable, though her genetic makeup was inexplicable. She seemed to endure the prodding politely, though Ethan could sense her weariness. Outside, the waves glimmered in the moonlight, as though acknowledging the newfound revelations. Talinor's barrier was gone. An alien presence, once hidden, was now in the care of a research vessel. Rhea spoke little. When Ethan inquired if she was all right, She merely nodded, replying softly, I am free and yet adrift. It's a strange feeling. All my life, I was bound to that island. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Freedom can be frightening at first, he said. But you'll see. It's worth embracing. Days passed. Talinor was officially declared to be under the protection of an international agreement, as many nations vied for the right to explore it. Ethan had many debriefings with people in suits who asked how he survived, how he'd ended up in the middle of nowhere, whether he'd been alone. He offered partial truths, highlighting the strangest parts of the island while shielding Rhea's deeper secrets. Rhea herself was taken under cautious observation. Some believed her to be a scientific marvel, others a security risk. Yet each time officials questioned her, Ethan insisted on being present, determined to ensure she was treated with dignity. Her first weeks in a standard research facility were disorienting. She had read about such places in her data lessons, but never personally experienced them. She marveled at computers, at Wi-Fi signals that worked uninterrupted, at telephones that rang from distant corners of the building. Through it all, Ethan remained by her side, explaining bits of Earth culture. He found her curiosity boundless. She would examine the smallest aspects of daily life with wide-eyed wonder. Over time, the staff realized she posed no threat. Her gentle demeanor, combined with Ethan's unwavering support, melted away their initial apprehension. Gradually, they were allowed more freedom. Rhea accompanied Ethan to a small coastal town, where the tang of salt air brought back memories of Talinor. She had never walked through a busy street, never seen so many humans in one place. Cars and motorbikes roared by, startling her. The hum of electricity overhead reminded her of the island's daily pulses. She looked to Ethan for reassurance. They strolled along a pier, gulls cawing overhead, the ocean a blue sprawl that seemed infinitely more expansive now that Rhea was no longer confined behind a barrier. She peered down at her reflection in the water, seeing her fine-boned face, her tapered ears hidden beneath a scarf, her luminous eyes. Is it difficult to pass for human? Ethan asked gently, noticing her attempt at concealment. She exhaled. In time, I'll learn your customs, adopt your mannerisms. But I will always be different. Always an echo of the place I was born. He touched her arm lightly. Being different isn't bad. She offered him a shy smile. You speak with such certainty. He shrugged. You saved my life out there. And I helped save yours. Maybe two misfits, together, can find a sense of belonging. Her eyes shone at his words, and for a moment, the noise of the pier faded away. 13. Their integration into normal society proceeded in small, measured steps. Scientists from around the world clamored for the chance to interview Rhea, to run their tests and examine her hybrid biology. Some at the facility insisted she remain under their watchful eye, but Ethan argued passionately for her autonomy. In the end, negotiations placed her under a protective arrangement. She was not a prisoner, but a ward, free to explore Earth if accompanied by an approved escort. That escort was Ethan, who had by then been offered a teaching position at a nearby university, no doubt a role designed to keep him accessible to official channels. To Rhea, it was the first glimpse of a normal routine. She settled into a small apartment, though at times the hum of city life made her restless. On weekends, Ethan would drive them to the coast, where they watched the sunset. She would tilt her face to the sky, as if drawn to the infinite expanse of space and all that lay beyond. At night, she sometimes woke, startled, from dreams of fractal corridors and crackling energy fields. She would place a palm against the window pane, recollecting the pulsing warmth of Talinor's system. It was gone now, its crystal spire dormant, left to be studied by teams of geophysicists and marine explorers. A hint of sorrow ghosted her features then, for the island had shaped her existence, no matter how cruel its captivity. In the months that followed, Rhea's story became an open secret. Conspiracy theorists whispered about an island vanishing from the maps, UFOs, or hidden alien labs. But the official stance was hush-hush, cloaked in half-truth. Rhea herself gave a few quiet interviews, but she kept her identity disguised, choosing only to share her experiences with carefully vetted researchers. For Ethan, the wonders of her presence never faded. Each day, her inquisitive spirit reminded him of how extraordinary the universe could be. Her laughter, once so rare, blossomed whenever she found humor in earthly customs. She was entranced by animals, a stray cat by their doorstep, the chatter of parrots in a sanctuary, even the unassuming goldfish in a friend's aquarium. One crisp morning, Ethan took her to a deserted stretch of beach. The ocean breeze was cold, the sand golden in the pale dawn light. She pulled her scarf tight, a small shiver betraying her chill. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern etched in his eyes. She pressed her lips together, nodding. "I'm well. Just never expected Earth's nights to feel so cool." Talinor was always warm. He offered his jacket, and she accepted it with a grateful smile. They stood side by side, watching the gentle waves break. "Rhea," he said after a long pause, voice low, "do you ever miss it?" Her gaze went distant. The island's illusions, the sense of connection to something larger, yes, at times. But I do not miss the cage it became, nor the solitude. He nodded, struggling to find his words. "I'm glad you're here," he said softly. "With me, with the rest of humanity. I know it might be overwhelming, but I'd be lost without you." She turned, eyes shining in the early light. "You saved me from more than just the cataclysm," she said. "You showed me a path to belonging." And her voice caught, a tear slipping free. "I have never felt such gratitude. Such, dare I say, hope." Her declaration was all the impetus Ethan needed. He drew her gently into his arms. She relaxed against him, letting the hush of dawn and the crashing of waves be the only witness to the moment. Despite the hush surrounding Talinor's technology, official research teams continued to send out expeditions. Some scientists returned with fragments of crystal, describing how they no longer emitted energy, but appeared to be artificially grown quartz. Others found mutated flora and fauna that had begun reverting to natural forms. Among these changes, one thing was clear. Talinor no longer bristled with the hidden power that once overshadowed it. Its structures were stable but inert, as though slumbering. Ethan received occasional updates. He shared them with Rhea, who listened thoughtfully. At times, a wistful look passed over her features, but it was a gentle sorrow, unting by regret. One day, a group of officials approached Rhea with a proposition. They believed her perspective could be critical in deciphering a final, unresponsive subchamber discovered beneath the spire. "We only found it through sonar scans," they explained. "We'd welcome your expertise." Ethan glanced at Rhea, gauging her reaction. She considered it for a long time. "That place was once my prison," she said softly. "But if it helps humanity understand my people's technology, perhaps there is value in returning." He squeezed her hand in support. "We'll go together." And so, months after their first harrowing escape, they flew by helicopter to the island once more. This time, the seas were calm, unguarded by swirling storms, for the barrier was no more. When they landed, the changes were profound. Trees had grown in haphazard, random patterns. The fractal forms were either dead or shifting into more conventional shapes. The cat lizard creatures had apparently migrated or died off, replaced by small, timid animals that scampered through the brush. The crystal spire still rose in the center of the island, though now it shimmered faintly, more a memorial to past grandeur. At the spire's base, near where the meltdown had been averted, a newly unearthed tunnel sloped downward. With the help of a few politely curious scientists, Rhea and Ethan descended. Inside, they found a small chamber etched with intricate designs. This, they realized, was an observation room. Monitors, now dark, lined the walls. Rhea's breath caught when she recognized devices once used to track her vitals, her growth, her psychological state. She touched one broken console. "They were always watching me," she whispered bitterly. "I was their experiment." Ethan laid a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're more than that." A hush lingered, then she drew a sharp breath. "There." She pointed to a narrow data cache, half buried under debris. With Ethan's help, she pried it free. The device was a crystalline block, faintly flickering with residual power. Rhea clutched it. "It may contain their research logs, files about the experiment, or maybe even records of my creation. I might learn why they truly left me." The scientists around them exchanged glances. "Will it still function?" one asked. She closed her eyes, pressing her palm to the crystal surface. "I feel a faint hum," she murmured. "There might be enough power for a partial recovery, but I'd need specialized tools to decode it." The group agreed to transport it for further study. Rhea's expression was a mix of anticipation and trepidation. Back on the mainland, the data cache was placed in a secure lab. For days, a specialized team worked around the clock, but progress remained slow. Rhea sometimes joined them, hands pressed to the console, trying to coax out memories from a past she never fully knew. Ethan watched her, concerned that delving into these details might reopen old wounds. But she pressed on, determined to face the truth. Finally, a flicker of success. Lines of alien script appeared, scrawling across the screen. An index of research logs, date stamped in a notation none recognized, but Rhea seemed to read instinctively. They discovered references to hybrid subject R1, described as part of a plan to bridge energies from a higher dimensional existence with Earth-based life forms. Rhea skimmed these logs, her brow furrowing. They wanted to see if a being could exist at the nexus of their advanced energy and human biology, so that they might one day integrate seamlessly on Earth. She spoke the words as though reciting a story that both saddened and infuriated her. They found me promising, she continued in a near whisper. But a containment breach occurred, some kind of meltdown in the early prototypes. The logs say they believed me destroyed. Yet one file suggests something else, that it was better to abandon the entire project than risk exposure if I survived. Ethan's jaw tightened. They sacrificed you for secrecy. Rhea's eyes glistened, but her posture was resolute. Let the truth be recorded, she said. I no longer need their justifications or apologies. I'm here, now, living freely as I choose. She turned off the console, shoulders trembling. Ethan pulled her into a gentle embrace, letting her tears fall silently. Over the ensuing year, Rhea's existence continued to provoke awe in those who met her. She found friends among open-minded researchers, forging relationships that transcended species. She also encountered cynics, fearful that her presence heralded an invasion. Through it all, Ethan remained her anchor. On a warm spring morning, they attended a public symposium. Rhea, disguised with a hat and tinted lenses, sat in the audience as Ethan gave a lecture on Talinor's extraordinary geometry. He spoke with passion, weaving together archaeology, biology, and the island's bizarre fractal phenomenon. Afterward, they walked through the university's manicured lawns. Students bustled about in a hurry, some glancing curiously at the tall, striking woman whose eyes shone behind tinted lenses. Rhea paused by a blooming magnolia tree, inhaling its sweet scent. It's so random, she said with delight. The way the petals unfold. Nothing like the sterile perfection of my old home. Ethan touched one of the petals, nodding thoughtfully. Imperfection can be beautiful. She smiled, leaning into him as they strolled. Yes, I think I prefer it this way. They passed a group of students practicing with drones. The small machines buzzed overhead, capturing aerial footage of the campus. Rhea watched them with interest, remarking on how similar they were to the probes used by her people, yet infinitely more clumsy. She said it with a light laugh, one that made Ethan's heart warm. You sound happy, he observed gently. She shrugged, a trace of her old sadness flickering for just an instant. I still think about that moment we shut down the spire. I wonder, what if I had remained on Talinor? But then I remember the emptiness, the lonely corridors, the fractal illusions. Here, I might be an outcast or a curiosity, but I'm alive in ways I never was before. He took her hand. And I'll always stand by you, he said firmly. No matter what the future brings. One late summer evening, they found themselves on the beach once more, a place that had become a sanctuary for them. The sunset painted the sky in shades of peach and lavender, gulls mewing overhead. The tide rushed in gentle waves against the shore. Rhea knelt at the water's edge, letting the cool surf lap against her feet. She gazed at the horizon, expression thoughtful. The ocean is vast, she murmured. Its depths are still so unknown to your kind. It reminds me a little of how my people saw Earth, as a vast resource to be studied, shaped, even controlled. I fear that was their downfall, their pride in believing they could meddle without consequence. Ethan settled beside her, arms resting on his knees. Humans have made similar mistakes, time and again, he conceded. History is full of them. I guess some lessons are universal. They watched the sun vanish below the horizon, leaving behind a gentle twilight. Stars emerged slowly, dotting the heavens in quiet splendor. Rhea tilted her head back. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if a ship from my people will arrive, if they'll look for the data we uncovered or want to reclaim me." Ethan tensed. "And if they come?" She shrugged, a soft, bittersweet smile on her lips. "I don't belong to them. Not anymore. The part of me that is alien might still sense their presence, but my life is here now, on Earth." His relief was palpable. He laid a hand on hers, entwining their fingers. "Then that's all I need to hear." A warm breeze stirred, carrying the tang of salt. They sat in companionable silence, letting the ocean's lullaby fill the spaces between them. Word of Rhea's identity eventually trickled into public media, leading to fleeting bursts of frenzy. Photographs of her in the background of academic events surfaced, followed by swirling rumors. Yet as quickly as the hype rose, it subsided. The government admitted that an exotic experiment from an abandoned facility had been recovered. It denied the presence of other extraterrestrials. Curiosity died down in the face of larger global issues. Rhea adapted, picking and choosing the corners of life she would explore. She took up painting, finding an art of freedom that mathematics once denied her. Her works displayed swirling geometric forms interlaced with bursts of color, echoes of Talinor's fractal beauty fused with Earth's randomness. Critics who saw her pieces found them hauntingly evocative, though they had no idea of the real story behind them. Ethan continued to teach, devoting spare hours to writing a book on the significance of fractal motifs throughout human history and how they related, subtly, to the phenomena discovered on Talinor. In acknowledgement of Rhea's privacy, he kept her name out of it, referring instead to an otherworldly collaborator. And so their days found a gentle rhythm. University duties, clandestine lab visits, quiet nights at home. One morning, a coded message arrived on Ethan's phone from an official channel. It indicated that unexpected readings had been recorded near Talinor, possibly signs of reactivated technology. Wary that these signals could be a ruse or a reawakening, the agency asked Rhea for guidance. She pondered the request for several days, reluctance warring with curiosity. Finally, she decided to return to Talinor for a final, conclusive visit to verify whether her people's systems might indeed be reviving. Ethan insisted on accompanying her. They traveled by a small research vessel, escorted by a handful of scientists. Talinor came into view at dawn, its shores now more reminiscent of any Pacific island, with random clusters of tropical foliage, none of the symmetrical grandeur that once characterized it. Disembarking on the beach, they found it quiet, the air still. The locals who once might have been alarmed by monstrous creatures reported none. They did, however, mention that near the spire, faint lights had been seen dancing at night. Ethan and Rhea made their way inland, stepping over roots and brush. Where once the path had been precise, now nature reigned in chaotic tangles. The closer they got to the spire, the more an uneasy feeling crept up Ethan's spine. He remembered all too well the cataclysm narrowly averted here. But as they broke through the last ring of vegetation, they found the spire as calm as ever. No ominous hum, no cracks flaring with energy. Instead, a mild shimmer ran across its surface like a gentle pulse. Rhea approached slowly, pressing a palm against the crystal. She closed her eyes. Moments dragged by, tension thick in the air. Then, with a faint, musical tone, the spire's shimmer faded, and the crystal went dark again. She turned to Ethan. "Residual energy," she explained. "Nothing more. No sign of reactivation. Talinor systems are not coming back. This is simply the last echo of what once was." A swirl of relief passed through the group. The scientists took a few readings, confirmed nothing was reawakening. Whatever fleeting signals had been detected were just the island's final sigh of energy. In the hush that followed, Rhea stepped away from the spire. "Farewell," she whispered, gazing at the silent crystal. Then she turned, took Ethan's hand, and they walked back through the newly chaotic jungle, leaving the illusions of her old life behind for good. On their return to the mainland, word spread that Talinor posed no further mysteries. The island was left in peace, protected by international treaties, open to cautious research. Over time, it might become a curiosity in the realm of travelers, yet never again the hidden fortress it once was. Rhea found a profound sense of closure. No longer did she dwell on the question of whether her people would return. She had, in essence, made her choice, forging a new life among humans. And so it was that, on an early autumn evening, she and Ethan found themselves in a quiet garden behind the university, an unassuming spot with an old oak tree, a little pond, and vines that grew in unplanned tangles around a trellis. Leaves tinted gold and red drifted in gentle breezes. They sat on a bench, observing a small gaggle of ducks waddle along the pond's edge. Rhea chuckled softly at their odd movements. "They're wonderfully clumsy," she said, eyes alight with mirth. "It's refreshing." Ethan nodded. "No symmetrical constraints. No hidden algorithms. Just nature, living on its own terms." She rested her head on his shoulder, exhaling with contentment. "I used to think the symmetrical patterns were so beautiful," she confessed. "But now I see that variety, unpredictability, these are the true wonders of life." He slipped an arm around her. "I'm glad you found that wonder here." She turned, meeting his gaze. Her luminous eyes seemed to reflect both the present moment and the deep cosmic tapestry of her origins. "Ethan," she said softly, "thank you for bringing me into this world, not as a specimen, but as a person." He flushed slightly. "I didn't do that alone. You chose to trust me, even when you could have turned away." A hush fell, the late afternoon light draping them in warm gold. The brassy call of a distant trumpet from the music building drifted across the campus. A swirl of leaves tumbled past. Smiling, Rhea leaned in, her voice low. "I was forsaken by my own kind, stranded in a place that was both wondrous and cruel. I thought I would spend eternity alone. But you showed me that I could still belong somewhere, that I could still feel at home." Gently, he tipped her chin up, their eyes locking. "You are home," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Then he lowered his lips to hers. The garden, the evening sun, the drifting leaves, all bore witness to a quiet, tender moment that spanned two worlds. He, an archaeologist driven by curiosity, and she, an alien woman once confined to a hidden isle, came together in the simple truth of shared affection. In that kiss, there was a promise of tomorrow, unburdened by the tragedies of yesterday. The final vestiges of Talinor's secrets, the memory of a fractal garden and a shimmering barrier, reseeded into stories told around a gentle hearth. Rhea was free to live among humans, to explore Earth's endless tapestry of cultures, its complexities, its imperfections. And so their story found its happy end, not in isolation, but in the embrace of a new beginning. Two companions, forging a life shaped by acceptance and love, each grateful that fate had guided them to the hidden isle where everything changed.